The first thing my brother did after becoming vice president was fire me. Not because I had failed, not because I had broken company policy, but because he thought I had become inconvenient. He stood beside Human Resources with a satisfied smile while they accused me of secretly working a second job during company hours. They slid my termination papers across the table. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply signed my name, looked directly into my brother's eyes, and said, "You're right. I really should focus on just one job." He laughed. So did Human Resources. Neither of them realized my second job wasn't a freelance side hustle. It was the cybersecurity company their CEO had been trying to buy for $50 million. And within 48 hours, the same executives celebrating my termination would be begging me to save their collapsing company. My name is Nina Hale. I'm 33 years old. For 6 years, I worked as a senior risk analyst at Meridian Financial Partners in Chicago. Officially, my job was identifying compliance risks before regulators found them. Unofficially, I spent every day quietly preventing disasters nobody else even knew existed. Whenever a broken reporting system threatened a federal violation, I fixed it. Whenever a security protocol failed, I patched it. Whenever executives congratulated themselves after another flawless audit, they were celebrating work they never knew I'd done. I never complained. I believed results spoke louder than recognition. I couldn't have been more wrong. The call from Human Resources came on a gray Tuesday morning. "Monica would like to see you." No explanation. No subject line. Just a calendar invitation marked immediate. People inside Meridian understood what that usually meant. You didn't get invited into Monica Reynolds' office unless something had already been decided. The Human Resources floor always felt colder than the rest of the building. Bright fluorescent lights, perfectly aligned furniture, no family photos, no warmth. Everything designed to remind employees one simple truth. People were replaceable. Policies weren't. Monica didn't ask me to sit. She simply pointed toward the leather chair across from her desk. Her expression never changed. Professional, emotionless, almost rehearsed. Someone else was already in the room. My older brother, Spencer Hale, 36 years old. Recently promoted vice president of risk management. He leaned casually against the doorframe with his arms folded, wearing the same confident smile our parents had praised since we were children. To strangers, he looked charismatic. To people who worked beneath him, he looked dangerous. Growing up, Spencer had mastered one remarkable talent. He never needed to achieve greatness. He only needed someone else's work to stand beside. If I earned perfect grades, our parents congratulated him for setting a good example. If I won scholarships, they thanked him for motivating his little sister. If something went wrong, I somehow became responsible. Over time. And I stopped competing. There was no point racing against someone who always crossed the finish line first, because everyone moved it for him. His promotion 2 months earlier hadn't surprised me. His qualifications certainly hadn't earned it. Relationships had. Golf weekends with senior partners, private dinners, old fraternity connections. Meanwhile, I stayed late every evening fixing compliance failures no executive even noticed. Someone had to keep the company alive. Monica finally opened a thick manila folder. She slid it across her desk. "We've completed an internal investigation." Her voice was perfectly flat. "We have substantial evidence that you've been operating a secondary business during company hours using company resources." She pushed several printed reports toward me. Encrypted network activity, large data transfers, secure communications, all flagged by the internal monitoring system. To them, it looked suspicious. To me, it looked exactly like the routine maintenance I'd been performing for years. "We consider this a serious violation of your employment agreement." She folded her hands. "Your employment with Meridian Financial Partners is terminated effective immediately." No warning, no suspension, no internal review, Just termination. Already decided. Already approved. I looked at Spencer, not Monica. Spencer. Because I finally understood what this meeting really was. This wasn't human resources. It was theater. And my brother had written the script. For weeks, I'd noticed warning signs inside his department. Major institutional clients quietly disappearing, compliance reports delayed, senior partners asking increasingly uncomfortable questions. Spencer wasn't managing risk management. He was drowning inside it. He needed someone else to sink first, someone visible, someone expendable, someone close enough to make his integrity look convincing. Firing his own sister accomplished all of that. To the board. Oh, he'd appear fearless, objective, committed to the company above family. It was a brilliant political move. If nobody knew the truth, there was another reason. One far more personal. Only a week earlier, Spencer had complained that Meridian couldn't afford another executive hire. Yet somehow, he'd been talking nonstop about bringing in Grant Mercer, his old fraternity brother. A man whose greatest professional skill seemed to be organizing charity golf tournaments. No cybersecurity experience, no compliance background, no qualifications. But plenty of connections. My salary would fund Grant's position perfectly. Suddenly, everything made sense. He wasn't eliminating a problem. He was creating space for an ally, and I was paying for it. I felt my heartbeat slow instead of accelerate. That surprised even me. Maybe because betrayal loses its power once it finally makes sense. This wasn't the first time Spencer had sacrificed me. It was simply the first time he'd done it wearing an expensive suit. He watched me carefully, waiting, expecting tears, arguments, panic. He wanted me to beg. Our parents always said older brothers protected their sisters. Mine preferred audiences. He wanted one final performance. Instead, I reached into my purse, removed my favorite fountain pen, opened the final page, signed my name. No hesitation, no protest, just ink gliding across paper. Monica blinked. Clearly, this wasn't the reaction she'd prepared for. Spencer frowned. Only slightly. Confusion replacing confidence for the first time that morning. I closed the folder, slid it gently back across the desk. Then I stood, smoothed the sleeve of my blazer, looked directly into my brother's eyes, and smiled. "You were right," I said quietly. "I really should focus." "Oh." "On just one job." For half a second, something flickered across Spencer's face. Not understanding. Instinct. The tiny feeling that somewhere, something had just gone terribly wrong. But it disappeared almost immediately. He laughed. Monica smiled politely. Neither of them realized they hadn't just fired the woman protecting Meridian from disaster. They had just disconnected the only firewall standing between the company and complete corporate collapse. The elevator doors closed behind me. No applause, no dramatic confrontation, just the quiet hum of steel carrying me away from 6 years of my life. I stared at my reflection in the mirrored wall. Cardboard box. Laptop charger. One framed photo. A coffee mug that read, "Solve the problem, not the politics." Funny. Politics had won anyway. When the doors opened onto the lobby, my company badge stopped working. One final reminder. I no longer belonged there. The security guard behind the reception desk looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Nina. Policy." "I know." I handed him the badge. "It's not your decision." He nodded gratefully. Sometimes, kindness was simply refusing to blame the wrong person. Outside, Chicago's November wind cut straight through my coat. I loaded the cardboard box into my car, didn't start the engine, didn't cry. Instead, I opened my phone. 43 unread messages. Most were routine. Client updates, compliance alerts, automated reports. One message wasn't. Ethan Cross. Can you call when you're free? My business partner. 2 years earlier, I'd quietly co-founded Sentinel Ridge Cybersecurity. Officially, I owned 49%. Ethan owned 51%. His name appeared on every public document. Mine almost nowhere. It had been my idea, my condition. I wanted the company judged by its work, not by questions about conflicts with Meridian. So while I spent my days protecting one financial firm, my nights were spent building software that protected dozens of others. People often assumed cybersecurity was about hackers wearing hoodies. It wasn't. Most disasters started much smaller. One careless click, one forgotten software update, one executive convinced nothing bad would ever happen to them. Companies rarely collapse because criminals were brilliant. They collapsed because arrogance was cheaper than preparation. I returned Ethan's call. "You okay?" he asked immediately. They finally did it. A long silence. "I'm sorry." "I'm not." That surprised him. "You don't sound upset." I looked back at Meridian's headquarters towering above the street. "I'm just finished pretending." Ethan exhaled softly. "Want me to cancel this afternoon?" I knew exactly what he meant. At 3 o'clock, Sentinel Ridge had a confidential acquisition meeting. Not with just anyone, with Meridian Financial Partners, the company that had fired me less than an hour earlier. They wanted to purchase Sentinel security platform for $50 million. They just didn't know. I'd helped build every line of it. "No," I answered calmly. "We keep the meeting." "You sure?" "They've already made one expensive mistake today." "No reason to stop them." I drove home instead of to the office, not because I wanted to rest, because I needed perspective. My apartment wasn't large. 1 bedroom, bookshelves filled with technical manuals. 2 coffee plants struggling to survive by the kitchen window. Everything inside had been earned. Nothing had been inherited. I liked it that way. As I set the cardboard box on the dining table, my phone buzzed again. This time, my mother. I considered ignoring it. Experience suggested otherwise. Ignoring family rarely delayed the conversation. It only made it louder later. "Nina!" Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. "I heard what happened." News traveled fast, especially when Spencer was the one telling it. "I figured." She sighed dramatically. "You should have listened to your brother." "I always do." "No. You argue with him." "I disagree with him." "Same thing." I smiled sadly. Only in our family could independent thought be considered rebellion. "Spencer says the company found evidence," she continued. "I hope you weren't doing anything embarrassing." Embarrassing. Not illegal. Not unethical. Embarrassing. She was already protecting his reputation before she'd even heard mine. "What exactly did Spencer tell you?" "That he had no choice. He said firing you broke his heart." I laughed, quietly. "He practiced that line well." "What does that mean?" "It means..." I looked at the skyline outside my window. He knew this meeting was coming long before I walked into it. Silence. Then Mom's familiar answer. "I'm sure he was only doing his job." Of course. He always was, no matter what happened. Spencer was simply doing his job. I was the complication. After hanging up, I walked to the bookshelf near my desk. Behind a row of cybersecurity textbooks sat a small wooden box. Inside were 6 handwritten notes, one for every promotion I'd never received. I started the tradition after my 2nd year at Meridian, every time someone else took credit for work I'd done. I wrote down exactly what had happened, not out of bitterness, out of memory. Success has a way of rewriting history. I refused to let mine disappear. The most recent note was dated 3 weeks earlier. Prevented federal reporting violation. Spencer presented solution as departmental initiative. Board applauded him. I folded the paper closed again. Some lessons don't need rereading. At exactly 2:45 p.m., I arrived at Sentinel Ridge's downtown office. Glass walls, minimal furniture, no corporate slogans, just engineers solving problems. The receptionist smiled. "Good afternoon, Ms. Hale." No one here called me support staff. No one here introduced me as Spencer's sister. Here, I was one of the founders. Ethan was already waiting in the conference room. He looked up as I walked in. "How bad?" "Worse than expected." "They terminated you?" I nodded. He studied my face. "You look calm." "I am." "That's new." I finally stopped expecting people to become who they keep pretending to be. He slid a leather folder across the table. "Before Meridian gets here, there's something you should see." Inside was a copy of Meridian's confidential acquisition proposal. Their CEO wanted Sentinel immediately. The reason was highlighted in yellow. Critical cybersecurity vulnerabilities require immediate external support. I smiled. Just a little. For 6 years, I'd quietly protected Meridian from those exact vulnerabilities. Now, they were preparing to spend $50 million buying the solution. They'd fired that same morning. Before I could close the folder, the receptionist knocked gently on the conference room door. "They're here." Ethan looked toward me. "You want me to handle this?" I slowly closed the proposal, then stood. "No, I think... Yeah, it's finally time they met the person they decided they could live without." The conference room doors opened. 3 executives walked in first. Meridian's CEO, their chief financial officer, outside legal counsel. Spencer entered last, confident, relaxed, still wearing the expression of a man who believed he'd already won. He was halfway through introducing himself when he finally looked up and saw me. He stopped walking, only for a second, but it was enough. "Nina?" His voice came out lower than he'd intended. I smiled politely. "Good afternoon, Spencer." The CEO turned toward him. "You two know each other?" Spencer recovered almost instantly. "My younger sister." He laughed lightly. "Small world." No one else laughed. Ethan stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to Sentinel Ridge. I'm Ethan Cross, our co-founder." The CEO shook his hand. "We appreciate you making time." "Our pleasure." Ethan gestured toward the remaining chair. "And this is our chief security architect." He looked at me. "Nina Hale." The room became completely still. The CEO frowned. "I'm sorry. Did you say Hale?" "Yes," I answered calmly. "The same Nina Hale, whose employment Meridian terminated this morning." No one spoke. The CFO slowly lowered the folder he had just opened. Even the attorney stopped taking notes. The CEO turned toward Spencer. "You fired her?" Spencer forced a smile. "It was an internal compliance matter." "I see." The CEO looked back at me. I'm unaware of the details." "I'm sure," I answered. "It happened before lunch." Ethan tapped a remote. The main screen lit up. Sentinel Ridge Cybersecurity. Below the company logo appeared a list of patents, security frameworks, detection systems, regulatory compliance tools. The CEO leaned forward immediately. "We've reviewed your technology. It's exactly what Meridian needs." "I know," I said. "I designed most of it." Silence. Not uncomfortable. Heavy. The kind of silence created when people suddenly realize, and they've misunderstood the entire room. The CEO looked toward Ethan. I wasn't aware Ms. Hale held this position. Ethan smiled. Very few people were. Was that intentional? It was her decision. He glanced at me. Nina preferred her work to speak first. I almost laughed. Apparently, that philosophy had finally expired. The CFO opened Meridian's proposal. We're prepared to offer $50 million for Sentinel Ridge and all associated intellectual property. Ethan didn't even touch the document. Instead, he looked at me. Would you like to respond? Another shift in power. He wasn't asking permission. He was giving me ownership. I opened the proposal, flipped slowly through the pages, stopped near the middle. There are 12 critical infrastructure concerns listed here. The CEO nodded. Correct. You believe Sentinel is the fastest solution? Yes. I closed the folder. It is. Spencer finally spoke, trying to reclaim the conversation. Nina, I know today has been emotional, but business is business. I looked at him. So was this morning. He ignored the remark. We'd like to keep personal issues separate. I tilted my head slightly. You mean, like terminating the person who built the solution you're trying to purchase? His jaw tightened. No. I mean, professional decisions. I smiled. I agree. So let's stay professional. I pressed another button on the remote. The screen changed. Meridian Financial Partners. Internal network architecture. The CEO frowned. How did you obtain that? I helped build it, I answered. Remember? I pointed toward one section. This authentication system. 5 years old. No multi-factor enforcement. Another. This reporting server. Still using legacy encryption. Another. These client vaults, protected by software already reaching end of life. The CEO slowly turned toward Spencer. You told us these systems had already been upgraded. Spencer didn't answer immediately. They were scheduled. Scheduled? The CEO repeated. You reported them as completed. The conference room grew noticeably quieter. The CFO began turning pages faster, looking for something, finding nothing. I continued calmly. Every recommendation I submitted over the past 3 years is still waiting for executive approval. I looked directly at Spencer. You signed every delay. He met my eyes. Budget constraints. No, I corrected. Golf retreats. The attorney stopped writing. The CEO stared at Spencer. The balance of power shifted again. Spencer leaned forward. Let's not exaggerate. I'm not. I reached into my folder, removed printed approval requests. Each one carried the same signature. Spencer Hale. Deferred, 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 deferred. One after another, I slid them across the table. No speeches, no accusations, just evidence. The CEO picked up the first page, then the second, then the third. With each document, his expression became harder to read. Finally, he looked at Spencer. Is this accurate? Spencer swallowed. They don't show the full context, I answered before anyone else could. They don't need to. They only show one thing. Every major security weakness currently threatening Meridian wasn't created by hackers. It was created, by leadership. No one argued, because every signature belonged to the same person. The CEO slowly closed the acquisition proposal, then looked directly at Ethan. Before we discuss buying your company, there are several conversations I need to have inside my own. He stood. The meeting was over, or so Spencer believed. As everyone gathered their documents, his phone suddenly began vibrating. Then the CEOs. Then the CFOs. One notification after another. The CEO checked his screen, his face drained of color. He looked at me, then at Spencer. "There has been," he whispered. "A network breach." He looked back down at the alert. "And according to IT, our backup recovery system isn't responding." The room fell silent, because every person there knew exactly what that meant. The company had just lost the one employee who knew how to bring it back. "There has been." The CEO stared at his phone. "A network breach." No one moved. The only sound in the conference room was the vibration of phones continuing across the polished table. The CFO checked his screen, then the attorney. Their expressions changed almost in perfect sequence. Confusion, concern, then fear. The CEO looked at Spencer. "What happened?" Spencer answered too quickly. "It's probably another phishing incident." "It isn't," the CFO interrupted. "Our payment systems just went offline." He refreshed the alert. "So did client authentication." Another notification appeared. "Regulators have been automatically notified." The room suddenly felt much smaller. The CEO turned toward me, almost instinctively. "Nina," then stopped himself. He remembered. I wasn't his employee anymore. Ethan quietly closed his laptop. Neither of us stood. Neither of us celebrated. Real cybersecurity failures weren't victories. They were emergencies. People's pensions, retirement accounts, corporate payroll. Everything depended on those systems staying alive. Spencer finally looked at me. "I know you understand this infrastructure." "I do." "Then help us." The words came out so naturally, as if the morning had never happened. I tilted my head. "Help you?" "Yes, the company needs you." I held his gaze. "This morning, the company decided it didn't." The CEO stepped between us. "Ms. Hale, I understand today's circumstances were difficult, but this isn't about internal politics anymore. It's about protecting our clients." I believed him. That was the tragedy. The people who would suffer first weren't executives. They were ordinary customers. "What exactly happened?" I asked. The CIO appeared on the conference room screen through an emergency video call. His face looked exhausted. "We don't know. Multi-authentication servers stopped responding. Our backup environment won't initialize. Every recovery script is failing." I frowned. "Failing? Or refusing to start?" He blinked. "Refusing." A picture began forming in my head. Not ransomware. Not yet. Something stranger. "When did this begin?" "About 6 minutes ago." "Any unauthorized encryption?" "No." "Any ransom demand?" "No." I exchanged a quick glance with Ethan. He already understood what I was thinking. "This isn't an attack," I said quietly. The CIO frowned. "What?" "It sounds like your security system is protecting itself." Silence. I reached toward the conference room display. "Who approved the migration to the new authentication environment?" The CIO hesitated. "Vice President Hale." I nodded once. "When?" 3 weeks ago." "What happened to the old rollback system?" Another pause. "It was..." He looked away from the camera. Disabled." I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course it had been. 3 months earlier. But I'd submitted a report explaining exactly why removing the rollback environment created a catastrophic single point of failure. Spencer had rejected it. Budget reduction, operational efficiency, executive approval. I slowly turned toward him. "Do you remember the report?" He didn't answer. You called it.
Overly cautious.
Still nothing. You told the board. There was less than a 1% chance this could ever happen. The CEO's head snapped toward Spencer. Is she telling the truth? Spencer swallowed.
We evaluated the risks.
No, I corrected.
You ignored them.
The room fell silent. Again. Only this silence felt heavier. Because this wasn't about blame anymore. It was about time. Every passing minute increased Meridian's regulatory exposure. Clients would start calling. Markets would notice. News outlets would follow. The CEO took one slow breath, then looked directly at me. What would you do? Not, can you fix it? Not, will you help us? Just one question. What would you do? For the first time that day, someone wanted my judgment, not my obedience. I'd isolate every affected authentication server, I answered. Immediately. No public restart. No emergency patches. No random configuration changes. The CIO nodded rapidly, already taking notes. And then? The CEO asked. I'd restore the rollback environment. The CIO's face fell. We can't. Why not? It doesn't exist anymore. It was permanently deleted. I looked slowly toward Spencer. He couldn't meet my eyes. You deleted it? The CEO asked. It reduced operating costs, Spencer replied quietly. It reduced redundancy, I answered. Those aren't the same thing. The CEO took a step backward, as if physically distancing himself from the decision. Then he looked at Ethan. If Sentinel can stabilize this, Meridian will honor every term of the acquisition. Ethan didn't answer. He looked at me instead, just as he had all afternoon. The decision wasn't his alone. It never had been. I stood, walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking downtown Chicago. For 6 years, I'd protected Meridian, quietly, without recognition. This morning, they'd escorted me out of the building with a cardboard box. Now, the same executives who signed my termination papers were asking me to save the company. Part of me wanted to walk away. Another part remembered the thousands of employees who had nothing to do with Spencer's ambition. Neither choice felt easy. Neither choice felt completely right. I finally turned around. I'll help. Relief flooded the room. Then I finished the sentence. But not as your employee. The relief disappeared. I'll help as the CEO of the company you were trying to buy. Before anyone could respond, Ethan's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, then immediately handed it to me. Only 4 words appeared in the emergency alert. Secondary breach detected. Beneath it, another message arrived from Sentinel's monitoring system. The intrusion originated from inside Meridian. The intrusion originated from inside Meridian. No one in the conference room spoke. The CEO reached for the phone in my hand. Inside? I nodded once. That changes everything. The CIO's face was still projected onto the conference room screen. He looked confused. What do you mean? I placed the phone beside the monitor. External attackers don't usually disable recovery systems before moving. They exploit what's already broken. This, I pointed toward the alert, looks like someone already knew exactly where Meridian was vulnerable. Spencer laughed, short, dismissive. Now we're inventing conspiracies? I turned toward him. No, I'm eliminating possibilities. I walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room, picked up a marker, drew 3 circles. Network, authentication, backup, recovery. If ransomware caused this, then I connected only the first circle. The recovery environment should still exist. I drew a second line. If hardware failed, then authentication wouldn't collapse simultaneously. Then I tapped the third circle. But if someone deliberately removed your recovery path weeks ago, today's outage becomes almost impossible to stop. Silence. The CEO slowly looked at Spencer. When did you authorize deleting the rollback environment? Spencer crossed his arms. It wasn't deleted. It was modernized, the CIO interrupted immediately. No, his voice was barely above a whisper. It was permanently removed. The CEO closed his eyes. You told the board we had redundancy. We had redundancy, Spencer answered, until the migration finished. When was it supposed to finish? In next quarter. So for 3 months, we've had no recovery environment? No answer, because there wasn't a good one. The CIO suddenly spoke again. Wait! He frowned at another monitor. I'm seeing something strange. What? There are administrator logins using executive credentials. My stomach tightened. Whose? He hesitated. Vice President Hale. Every head turned toward Spencer. His expression hardened instantly. I didn't log into anything. The CIO kept reading. The credentials accessed restricted security policies, then disabled automated rollback. I wasn't even in the office, Spencer snapped. Someone stole my credentials. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, the company had a much bigger problem than one executive. Someone had administrator access. I asked the CIO one question. When was the last mandatory password rotation? Silence. Longer than I liked. Finally, about 14 months ago. The CEO stared. I approved quarterly rotations. The CIO looked embarrassed. They were postponed. By who? He slowly turned toward Spencer again. Spencer slammed one hand against the table. This is ridiculous. Everything can't be my fault. No, I answered calmly. It isn't. He blinked. For the first time that afternoon. I agreed with him. You didn't create today's breach, I continued. You created the environment where one breach could destroy the company. Those two things weren't the same, but they were connected. The CEO sat down heavily, looking years older than he had an hour earlier. What happens now? I answered honestly. If we don't isolate the compromised systems, regulators will assume client data may have been exposed. And if they were? The financial penalties. And that will be the smallest problem. The attorney finally spoke. What becomes the largest? Trust, I answered. Clients forgive outages. They don't forgive secrets. Another emergency alert appeared. This time, the CIO didn't even try to hide his fear. We've lost another authentication cluster. The map behind him lit up red. One server, then another, then 5 more, like dominoes. The CEO looked directly at me. Nina, I need an answer. Can Sentinel stabilize Meridian? I looked at Ethan. He already knew what I was thinking. Technically, yes. Legally, not yet. We can, I said, but not under the acquisition proposal. The attorney frowned. What do you mean? I won't sell Sentinel. The room went silent. The CEO stared. But that's why we're here. No, I corrected. You're here because you thought buying technology was cheaper than listening to the people who built it. No one argued, because every person in the room knew exactly who I'd been talking about. I slid Meridian's acquisition proposal back across the table. Untouched. I have a different offer. The CEO slowly picked it up.
What kind of offer?
A temporary emergency response contract.
Independent.
Transparent. No acquisition. No ownership. No control over Sentinel. The CFO looked shocked. You'd walk away from $50 million? I smiled faintly. No, I'm walking away. From becoming part of the culture that created this disaster. The CEO looked down at the unsigned proposal, then at the emergency alerts still flooding his phone. He knew he no longer had leverage, not after this morning, not after firing the person sitting across from him. He quietly closed the folder.
I'll sign your contract.
Relief spread through the room, except it lasted less than 3 seconds. The CIO suddenly leaned toward his camera. His face had gone completely pale.
We have another problem.
No one breathed. What now? The CEO asked. The CIO swallowed hard. We've identified the account that initiated the intrusion. He hesitated, then looked directly at Spencer. It wasn't an external hacker. It wasn't stolen credentials. He took a slow breath. The commands were executed from your office computer. The room fell into absolute silence. Even Spencer stopped breathing, because whether he was guilty or someone had used his machine, his career had just become the center of a federal cybersecurity investigation. The conference room fell completely silent. Every pair of eyes shifted toward Spencer. He didn't speak. He didn't move. For the first time in his career, he looked like a man who had run out of explanations. The CIO broke the silence first. We've confirmed the activity. The commands originated from Vice President Hale's workstation. The CEO slowly stood. Are you absolutely certain? We've verified it 3 times. The workstation initiated the administrative commands. The rollback environment was disabled from that machine. Spencer finally found his voice. I didn't do it. No anger. Just disbelief. I wasn't even in my office. The attorney looked at him carefully. Can anyone confirm that? I was in executive meetings. Most of the morning. The CFO frowned. But your computer wasn't. I watched Spencer quietly. Something felt wrong. Not impossible. Wrong. He was arrogant, political, self-serving. But he wasn't reckless. Destroying Meridian would have destroyed his own career first. That didn't fit. I turned toward the CIO. Was someone physically using the workstation? Or was it remote access? The CIO looked back at another monitor. Several long seconds passed. Then his expression changed. Remote. Someone authenticated remotely. I nodded slowly. What protected the executive workstations? He answered immediately. The endpoint security package. The one I recommended replacing 18 months ago? Silence. The CEO closed his eyes. Spencer rejected the budget. No one needed to say it. Every shortcut, every delayed upgrade, every ignored recommendation. They hadn't created the attacker. They had invited one. The CEO looked at me. Can you stop this? I answered honestly. Yes, but only if everyone in this room tells the truth. He nodded immediately. You have my word. I looked at Spencer. What about yours? He stared back. Then something inside him finally broke. I made terrible decisions, he said quietly. I delayed upgrades. I cut security budgets. I ignored Nina's reports. He swallowed hard. But I didn't attack Meridian. For the first time all day, I believed him. I turned back to the CIO. Disconnect every executive workstation, no exceptions. Disable every privilege credential. Start rebuilding trust from zero. The CIO didn't hesitate, already issuing instructions. The next 6 hours blurred together. Sentinel engineers arrived.
Meridian's internal team worked beside them. Nobody cared about job titles anymore, only solutions.
Servers came back online one by one. Authentication stabilized. Client systems recovered. The intrusion was contained before customer assets were compromised. The regulators were notified voluntarily before they discovered the incident themselves. It wasn't a perfect outcome, but it was an honest one. Sometimes, honesty limits damage more effectively than perfection. 3 weeks later, Meridian's board held an emergency leadership review. The findings were brutal. No evidence ever proved Spencer had launched the intrusion. Federal investigators ultimately concluded his workstation had been compromised because of outdated security controls and poor executive security practices. He wasn't guilty of cybercrime. He was guilty of something else. Negligence. Repeated negligence. His promotion disappeared. His vice president title disappeared. So did several other executives who had signed off on the same dangerous shortcuts. The CEO called me personally. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me one. I fired the wrong person. No, I answered calmly. You trusted the wrong people. There was a difference. He understood it. Several days later, Meridian formally withdrew its acquisition offer. Instead, they signed a 5-year strategic partnership with Sentinel Ridge. No buyout, no ownership, no control, just mutual respect. Exactly the way Ethan and I wanted it. One afternoon, I found Spencer waiting outside Sentinel's office. No lawyers, no executives, just my older brother. He looked older than I remembered. Not because of time, because consequences age people quickly. I wanted to apologize, he said quietly. I didn't answer immediately. He continued. I spent my whole life believing leadership meant people should follow me. He laughed bitterly. I never noticed. They were following you instead. I looked at him. I didn't want people to follow me. I wanted them to solve problems. He nodded. I know. I finally understand that. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded notebook page. The reports. He smiled sadly. I found every recommendation you wrote. I should have listened. I accepted the paper. Didn't unfold it. Some apologies matter because they're accepted. Others matter simply because they're finally spoken. Our parents called later that week for the first time in years. They didn't ask me to forgive Spencer. They didn't ask me to keep the peace. They simply asked whether we could have dinner together someday. Maybe. I wasn't ready. Healing isn't something you schedule on a family calendar. A year later, Sentinel Ridge had grown into one of the fastest-growing cybersecurity firms in the Midwest. Not because of Meridian, because companies had watched what happened. They noticed something important. When a crisis came, we didn't exploit it. We solved it. Trust became our greatest product. Sometimes people ask whether getting fired was the worst day of my career. I always smile. No, it was the most expensive mistake my brother ever made. Because the morning he celebrated walking me out of Meridian with a cardboard box, he thought he'd eliminated his biggest problem. Instead, he removed the one person quietly keeping his company alive. And looking back, I realized something my parents never understood. Titles can be given. Power can be borrowed. Connections can open doors. But the one thing nobody can fake for very long is competence. In the end, that was the only thing left standing.